Howdy YouTube! Today I want to show you this physically modeled tape emulation patch I've been working on, which can take your mixes from sounding like this to sounding like this. And the craziest thing is if I play this back once again side by side, pay attention to the limiter headroom and the loudness down here in the bottom right. We're essentially going to have more headroom and more loudness when we engage the tape emulation, which is really nice for mixing and mastering. Check it out. So in the dry signal, we were exceeding 0 dB by about 1.5. So we were engaging the limiter with about 1.5 decibels of attenuation, and the loudness was at about minus 10.5. But with the tape, we are not even really engaging the limiter, just a couple peaks here and there, and the loudness is at like minus 7.5 LUFS. It's way louder, more headroom. Sounds great. Let's check out what went into building this tape patch. So this physically modeled tape emulation has a lot of work that went into it. So I'm going to break this project up into a 3-episode series. In this episode, I just want to talk about what is the behavior of recording to tape that we want to capture in a software emulation. Basically, why is it worth our time to study the physics of tape and create a physically realistic tape emulator? So the process of recording audio to tape is literally transforming the signal. So let's say our audio waveform looks something like that. We can easily pass that through as an alternating current into a piece of wire. And if we wrap that piece of wire around in a coil, anytime alternating current passes through a coil, we create an electromagnet. And so that's what this figure over here is showing. There are these magnetic fields that wrap around the wire, and it's actually strongest in the center where there's the most of these magnetic field lines. And well, what can we do with this? Well, the magnetic field lines are proportional to the strength of the current. So it's magnetized, or it's creating a small magnetic field there. It's creating a large magnetic field there. And then when it's negative down here during the negative parts of our current, these north and south poles will flip directions. And so now we can actually magnetize this piece of tape with this alternating magnetic field. When audio is recorded to tape, the signal gets distorted in a unique way. This behavior is called hysteresis and is often represented by this curve over on the left. So this curve represents the nonlinear mapping from the input, which we call H, to the output, which we call B, or sometimes M. So if we were to start out at the origin, where the input and the output are 0, but then increase the input over here, we just go over to this mapping and see their outputs somewhere around here. But then if we were to increase our input signal further to here, our output is only going to increase just a little bit. And that's because we're in the saturated region, which causes this distortion on our signal. But unlike other types of distortion, there's some unique kind of state-dependent behavior going on here. And I think people like this type of sound, 1, because it's dynamic, and 2, because it's loud. And not just loud like any saturator gets loud, there's some special things about this hysteresis that makes it louder than other types of distortions. So let me first talk about the dynamic aspect. What I mean by that is these type of nonlinear mappings from input to output are like kind of the bread and butter of distortion. But this hysteresis is really interesting because it's kind of like a dynamic wave shaper, where when we start at the origin and go up, we get this type of wave shaping curve. And then when we're at this state and decrease the signal, we have this type of curve. And when we increase the signal again, we have that type of curve. So it's kind of like reactive. It's like kind of alive sounding. It's just more interesting than a static distortion. And this is just a simplified version of the curve for just like a sinusoid of a single amplitude. If we were to ramp the amplitude up to different levels, there's even more curves. It's just a very dynamic, reactive type of distortion. The second characteristic of tape hysteresis, which makes it sound pleasant, is that it's loud. Or I can be more convincing and say that it sounds louder, because what makes this tape hysteresis unique is that it acts like a sticky saturation, which can make it have an even higher perceived loudness than other types of saturating distortions. Let's make this concept crystal clear by walking through what would happen if we input a sinusoid through this hysteresis distortion curve. So if we start off at the origin and then head to this A state, we have this type of wave shaping behavior. Then as we transition from A to B, our input signal goes all the way to 0, but our output stays high. So this is what I call like the sticky behavior. It's sticking to that magnetized state. It's resisting going back to an unmagnetized state, and the average amplitude is staying higher. We can finish off this example by going to the C state, where our output is just getting down to 0, but our input's all the way in the negative region. And then quickly it will jump all the way to its saturated value as we go transition to the D state. And then once again, as our input drops back to 0, our output will hover around that saturated region. So it sticks to both rails, and it's going to have a higher amplitude and sound louder. So if my terrible handwriting made that example a little bit tricky to follow, I don't blame you. Here's a cleaner looking simulation that shows the same thing, where we're putting input sinusoid waveform. It's that blue curve on the left, and I'm running this through a real-time tape magnetization simulation. And then on the right-hand side is our that yellow curve is our output. It's the magnetized state of our recorded tape. And you can see it's like a distorted version of the signal. Like I was talking about, it kind of sticks to those negative and positive rails, creating a louder output. On the bottom, what I'm showing there is the atoms aligning magnetically, the magnetic dipoles aligning when we do magnetize the tape. If you're interested in learning more about the physics, in my next episode, I am going to be diving deep into that. But if you're not so hot in the physics and you just want to learn how to turn this into a functional plugin, you can skip the physics episode. My feelings won't get hurt. I'm posting these all at the same time, so you can watch them in any order depending on what's most interesting for you to dive into first. And if you'd like to see more content like this, you might consider subscribing to my channel. All right, I'll see you next time.